I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo, to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And first of all, I want to congratulate the entire chamber today on what is a big day for Minnesota. And of course, I refer to the fact that our long nightmare is over. Ryan Winkler is leaving the state of Minnesota to go to. Representative Winkler, I know I speak on. Mr. Speaker, I know I speak on behalf of members of both caucuses, and we wish Representative Winkler the best of luck in the future, and I know that we all have a travel partner in Belgium. Minnesota's loss is Belgium's gain, and we will wish you the best of luck in the future, Representative Winkler. Mr. Speaker and members, before we get into the contents of the bill, hang on. Mr. Speaker and members, first of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our excellent nonpartisan staff, Harriet Hendricks, Bob Eloff, Anita Newman, Laurie Pompu, Mary Mullen, and Ben Weeks. We want to thank them all for their tireless hours and excellent work performance they've done. Also on the Republican side of the aisle, I want to make a special thanks to the team I had the opportunity to work with this session. Harry Kennedy, Dr. Bill Glahn, Laura Larson, Jonathan Fortner, and Chelsea Whitner. I just want to say thank you for all your work, all the hours you put in. Mr. Speaker and members, as you take a look at the special session House File 3, you'll notice that it is remarkably similar to the bill that we passed on the last day of session. There are very few changes. I would estimate between 90 and 95% of the bill is the same. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Representative Dave Baker and those who are advocated for the Propane Relief Act. That is included in this bill now. The Propane Relief Act, not through spending more money, but by rather using money in a more intelligent and smart fashion, will be allowed to give more assistance to people in low-income areas for their low-income heating assistance program. Congratulations, Representative Baker. Also, I'd like to thank Dan Fabian and the bipartisan group of legislators who championed net metering reform, and I guess you could say that the co-ops of the state of Minnesota are pretty excited about this. Between the release of this bill and coming in today, we received no fewer than 75 letters of congratulations and thanks from the co-ops across the state of Minnesota. One co-op labeled this as the most energy-friendly legislation for municipal co-ops and regular co-ops in their recent memory. Representative Fabian, I think if you're any more popular, they'd probably start building statues for you, so congratulations to your work on that. Also, Representative Loon and Senator Bonoff have a good bipartisan reform in here called Minvest. This is allowed for crowd investing, crowdfunding of programs. It is fully funded in the bill so that MNsure will only cost $6,000 for the Minvest will only cost $6,000. Yeah, I wish MNsure cost $6,000. So there's that. Other than that, most of the stuff is pretty technical in nature. I would say that I think the committee had an extensive debate this year on greenhouse gas emissions from the federal government, those rules guiding energy policy. There's some changes to that in here from an advisory perspective, and also the energy-intensive trade-exposed language to help out those businesses, primarily in Otter Tail service territory and Minnesota Power service territory. Final budget note is this bill spends less money than the last budget. This bill comes in at $24 million less than the amount of spending in last year's previous budget for the general fund. Mr. Speaker, that completes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions from members of the body.
Discussion on the bill. Members, just to remind you, we will run this just like we do in our normal chamber. We'll ask you to stand at your seat if you're desiring to speak on the bill, and one of our staff will bring a wireless microphone right to you. So stand, I will recognize you, and then they will bring a microphone to you. I will also keep a list of those who are wishing to speak on the bills. So discussion on this bill. The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm impressed that this bill comes up first, gets this one out of the way. Members, this bill does many things, and as Representative Garofalo said, it spends $24 million less. Where that $24 million less comes from is Greater Minnesota Economic Development, from Metro Minnesota Economic Development. We had an unprecedented opportunity to build on what we had done 2 years previous, and we didn't do it. If this was the session for Greater Minnesota and economic development, Greater Minnesota better not hope for another session like this. You cut the funding for small business assistance. There's no funding in here for the small bridge loans that these small industries need when the banks say we need 110% equity before we'll loan you the money. This bill, Greater Minnesota came to this legislature looking for what we call BDPI, Business Development Infrastructure Grants. The economic development people, Edom, said that was their biggest need, cash. Cash to take care of those small shops that are vacant on city streets or small town streets. And I'll give you credit, you put $3.2 million or $3.3 million into it, but you earmarked the first year for every piece of it to Cambridge and Taylor's Falls. So they have no money. None of their dollars that they actually get to use the way that they see fit with their local control in this economic development bill. This is not the best way to do this. I typically like to have my notes on my desk, but I guess I'll have to fiddle with this. But I will say this bill is improved. This economic development bill is improved from when it left the floor, because it doesn't have the tip penalty in it. It doesn't have the preemption in it. It doesn't have the deregulation of voice over internet providers. It still has regulation of gold bullion in it. It doesn't have the fire sprinkler ban in it. And it doesn't raid the trust fund of the unemployment insurance group. So in the economic development bill, and I've been on this committee for 15 or 16 years, somewhere like that. Some people say way too long, particularly my wife. This is not. I'm going to repeat something that I said every time the Republicans pass a jobs bill. This is the jobless jobs bill. Oh wait, I stole that from somebody else. But this is the jobless jobs bill. Now let's go to the energy part of this particular bill. Well, I'll start with what's not in it, gratefully. There's no CIP, devastation, conservation improvement. This bill leaving the House the first time pretty much destroyed that program. There's no weakening of the renewable energy standards. Thank you, Governor Dayton. No gutting of the greenhouse gas emission standards. Again, thank you to somebody else. No weakening of the solar standards. But there's apparently 75 letters from somebody that says they like the fact that net metering is gone. Not gone, but pretty much at the bottom of the 37 states that have a net metering program. Well, that's good, because now we'll slow down solar expansion. And the solar industry in Greater Minnesota will suffer. And large corporations will take over the farms. The solar farms, I should say. So if you have a windmill, if you have a farmer in your district that put up a windmill, now if it's already up, it won't be a problem. But they will not be able to profit from putting a windmill in on their farm with this new bill. They won't be able to profit if they put up a solar panel and make a few dollars to help them keep their family farm going. Members, we're in close quarters. It's good that we started early because I could speak a little longer. And I could go on. This is not a good bill. This is not something to celebrate. This lights on jobs bill. Some people may be proud of it. All the more power to them, but I am not. It's got a lot of problems. It's got less problems than when it left the floor the first time. I'll be voting no. And I hope Greater Minnesota realizes how badly they got the deal here. Because one party said, send us there as a majority, and we will do everything possible to make your lives better. And that party failed. There will be less small businesses starting. There will be less small businesses expanding. There will be less jobs because of what we are not funding. That $24 million that fell to the bottom line for corporate tax cuts next year, we should all be ashamed of voting for this bill. But I won't be, because I won't be voting for this bill. Thank you, members, and let's get this done.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, I agree with much of what Representative Mahoney has just said about this bill. It's definitely a bill that takes some big steps backwards. But I rise to explain why I intend to vote for this bill, and that's because it has a couple of very important pieces in it that are of interest to my community. And those are a tweak to the Destination Medical Center legislation that's going to make sure that our intention, that was our original intention, is carried out, and that Rochester citizens are not going to be paying too much and not having their property taxes raised. And I credit Representative Norton with working very hard on that, along with others. A second piece has to do with Olmsted County, and I won't go into that here, but I just wanted to rise to say that although I intend to vote for this bill, I think the young people in the state of Minnesota should really be paying attention. They should really be paying attention because young people care about the environment. And they should really be watching to see who is guarding the environment, who is making the environment better, who's making sure that when they are older, when they have children and grandchildren, that we still live in a state that's green and that's healthy and that's sustainable. And so I think that the young people of the state should be watching this bill. They should be watching to see what happens with the environment bill that's coming forward. And with that, Mr. Speaker, thank you.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Johnson.
Thank you very much. My comments on this bill are that it takes Minnesota backwards in two significant ways. And just briefly, one is broadband. It fails to invest in broadband in any significant way, leaving the rural greater Minnesota behind. A significant lack of investment, and that is not good. The second thing is on locally grown energy. The net metering change only makes it more difficult for locally grown solar and wind to be developed. Both these changes are negative. This is a very uninspiring bill that takes Minnesota backwards and does nothing good for greater Minnesota. So I recommend a no vote.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It was difficult to listen to this 89th legislature and this bill being characterized as a failure of Republicans. When we're talking about jobs and economic growth, the failure here is the Democratic Party in refusal to deliver a comprehensive tax bill. There's 132,000 commercial property owners in Minnesota. 81% of those are small businesses with properties valued under $500,000 of value. Relief for these tax-paying businesses would have been in that bill, these folks would have seen an average of $3,000 to $4,000 at the maximum benefit returned to their respective businesses and allowing them to grow. But instead, the capital cronyism of taking your money and then passing it out and having state government decide what is going to be the best circumstance in which you will get a rebate is ridiculous. So anyway, let's get the record straight. It's not about what Republicans haven't offered. It's about what Democrats refuse to agree to.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I just want to take the opportunity to talk just a little bit more about broadband because there's no question that we have missed an incredible opportunity here to invest in all of Minnesota. And this continued talk about how much good has been done for Greater Minnesota and how great this bill is for Greater Minnesota, nothing could be further from the truth. I don't know what you all did for the last couple of weeks, but I have talked to a number of folks across Minnesota, including many folks in Greater Minnesota and small towns and cities, just to try to get some impression of what the thoughts were about what we've done here in St. Paul. And once you get beyond the disbelief that we were able to, essentially walk away from session without accomplishing much of anything, the questions come up about what are you going to do going forward? And the question is, what about economic development? Things are happening here in the metro area. Things are good. The economy is good. Job numbers are good. Things are good in the Duluth area. We're having the same positive things happening. We got investments in the economy. But you go out into Greater Minnesota and some smaller towns and cities, and those things aren't happening. And those folks are worried, and they're wondering when are they going to get their shot? And they're worried because there's no investments being made in their future. And they're wondering why you left $1 billion on the bottom line and didn't invest in their future. That's what they want to know. And I don't know who you're talking to, but that's who I'm talking to. And you've got 75 letters, Representative Garofalo. That's about 75 out of almost 2.5 million people in Greater Minnesota. So I think the ratio is a little bit off because, quite frankly, people are disappointed. And the fact is you left $1 billion on the bottom line and you didn't invest in Minnesota's future. Broadband is our future. You can't stand up and tell me that wireless is the way to go. Because if we don't have fiber connecting our towers, you have no wireless. You have no data transfer capabilities. This is reality in Greater Minnesota. We missed an opportunity here. And I hope that when we come back in 2017 that we can take some initiative and fix that. Thank you.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Oh, there's a microphone. Thank you very much. There's things to like and not like in every omnibus bill, and there's plenty of both in this bill. One of the things I did want to talk about has been touched on, which was broadband, and I won't repeat what was said, but what I will say is that even if you didn't want to spend part of that $1 billion and you wanted to just use money that's already available, there are some things funded in here that I have serious question about. Some of it, fortunately, the House, in its wisdom, didn't put in the initial bills, but in those negotiations with the Senate, I think we picked up a few things we shouldn't have. And so just to point out, one of my concerns, and I know you get lots of lobby, and they have some great lobbyists, and we hear from them all, is the film board. The film board in the House actually had some cuts, and instead what we have is $2 million over the base in this bill. That's $2 million that we could have spent on broadband. That's a start. As I understand it, the film board and the Snowbait, I think it's called, program actually have money being carried over. And in fact, so does the Host Community Fund program. And yet, not only have we not stopped funding programs that actually have money in them, we're adding or continuing programs rather than using that money for something that really could have been useful. The film board, I know some people don't want to hear this and it's uncomfortable, but it's not a great job creation tool, despite what you'll hear from the lobbyists, because when you have a tool like that that starts being done in every state, it loses its effectiveness. In fact, just this week, the state of Michigan, I don't know if it was their whole body or their house, just voted to discontinue funding their film board for that very reason. Because when every state does it, it loses its effectiveness, as a draw to our state. And so I would just say those were two disappointments that I saw, increasing the base from the current funding, and actually I thought the House was in the right direction in the first place with its choice to make cuts to those programs. So members, instead of funding broadband, which would really help rural Minnesota, which would help the economy and the businesses that want to grow, we're funding some items that already have money in their current budgets that they could have carried over.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker and members. And I've spoken before about my concerns about the changes in net metering, but I wanted to give a perspective from rural Minnesota. And Minnesota's net metering laws allowed many farmers to add value to their farm and become energy independent. Farmers look for ways to keep the next generation at home and at the same time add value to their property, cut costs, and help the environment. Many farmers have added these systems to keep the next generation at home on the farm by diversifying their operation. The cost to utilities in the overall picture passed on to customers is very small. In fact, the utilities currently pay the retail rate, but they also are able to buy at the price when they are buying peak energy from other sources. Although we appreciate that the bill doesn't impact current users of net metering, when it starts, new customers will be affected. And we're going to do this at a time when there's a tremendous interest in solar and renewed interest in small wind. So farmers will need to carefully analyze their ability to invest in such projects. It's not usual for a farmer doing a system to drop tens of thousands of dollars on a project, even $100,000, and then they use local electrification techs, concrete workers, and others to install them, and increasing local jobs. By changing this, many farmers have told me it's problematic in the small dollars they get per unit. Also helps with maintenance on systems, which will now be out of pocket if this bill passes. I've talked with some members of the Minnesota Farmers Union, and I happen to be a member myself. And they're very concerned about what utilities will charge for the interconnect fee and the process and costs that farmers will need to go through to get a fair price. And then finally, the bill language that says that credits cancel at the end of the calendar year is really a bad idea. This should have been written so that what happens is you lose all of December production, so it's an 11-month calendar, and the co-op gets the last month for free. It's poorly written, and hope we can address this next year. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. You know, when the committees were constituted this year, there was no housing committee. So the housing committee and the work that it used to do is now part of this committee that deals with the jobs bill and energy and so on. So I want to just mention, it hasn't been mentioned yet, this is the place where the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency receives its money. And this is a big problem with what's going on with that. I want to start by saying a really good part of the housing language that's in this bill has to do with the commitment that we made 2 years ago and we continue to make to try to deal with the incredible racial disparity in home ownership in Minnesota. 2 years ago, we were the very worst state in the whole nation in terms of our ability to provide home ownership opportunities to people of color. Thanks to the work that we did 2 years ago and the work with the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, the money we gave them, we are now only the third from the bottom in terms of that. So it's progress. What I'd like to say about the housing issues in this bill is, again, it's what was mentioned earlier, a real loss of opportunity. If we had taken some time to really invest in that language, there was a couple of mechanisms in this bill that created the mechanism to deal with this racial disparity in home ownership. One of them was called the Home Bill. It gets no funding in this bill. We started out with a very big idea of how much we could spend on that. Really, we could spend millions of dollars investing in trying to help that disparity. We ended up in one of the conference committees, I believe in the Senate, with $500,000 at one of the conference bills starting. In this committee, there's zero in this final session report. So that's a problem. The other thing is, if you look at the budget here, there was too much rush at the end. We could have solved some of these problems. I believe it's almost $900,000 that's given to the Minnesota Housing Agency under a line marked unearmarked appropriation. That is just unacceptable. To give an agency when we had real specific needs, to just give them total discretion when there was great need for some of the kinds of services that we need. And I just want to mention a couple of them that were lost because of that. One of them has to do with providing information to renters when they need it. The Homeline program is statewide, and we wanted to actually increase the opportunities for renters in greater Minnesota. That was part of that bill. The other one is something called open access, which is a way homeless people can get information and messages about when for jobs or emergencies or anything. That was not funded. And we also took the funding away from the needed work for the East African Women's Shelter. There was also language in here originally that came from the House. We had language for Asian Women's Shelter. There are just a number of culturally specific needs that we have, things that have to do with our look at racial disparities that are missing in this bill. Again, missed opportunities that could have been there. And so I'm going to suggest, I hope that we can make it part of our legislative intent. And I do know the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency has made a commitment to 2 of those programs to make sure that they do get some funding, and that's open access and Homeline. So I hope we'll hold them to that. But the other ones, the other culturally specific housing needs that we have are not met in this bill. And so I think we really could have done a good job with that. We started out one body or the other to put those parts in, but in the final session bill, they're not in there. So I just urge us to keep working on that issue in the future, Mr. Speaker. We can do better. We have a surplus and we could have funded them. Thank you.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. Are we done, Mr. Speaker? Oh, okay. Well, I can offer clarifying remarks right now. Would Representative Simonson yield for a question? We still do that here, right?
Yes, he will yield. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. Representative Simonson, you made some comments in your remarks, and can you explain to the body, we've seen a little bit of a disconnect in the rhetoric versus the reality, particularly from some members of the DFL caucus, championing against skyscrapers and corporate special interests, yet in your own community of Duluth, the DFL has championed a $4 million set-aside. Can you explain why to the DFL a $4 million set-aside for a Chinese-owned corporation is a higher priority for economic development than broadband?
Representative Simonson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Garofalo, I don't know that a $4 million set aside for anybody is more of a priority than broadband. Broadband expansion across the state of Minnesota is important to each community, whether you currently have it or you currently don't have it, because quite frankly, the future is here now. And these folks are in need, and that is, that should be one of our top priorities, because that is one of the top priorities that is being screamed for in greater Minnesota.
Mr. Speaker, would Representative Simonson yield for another question?
He will yield. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Representative Simonson, so just to be clear, the $4 million for Cirrus out of Duluth, your preference would be that go into broadband?
Representative Simonson. Mr. Speaker, Representative Garofalo, you have left $1 billion on the bottom line. $1 billion. You are talking about a $4 million bill for Cirrus aircraft that wasn't even carried by me, frankly. We can fund that. We can fund millions of dollars into broadband expansion that will provide hundreds of thousands of new jobs across Minnesota. So don't think that it's a priority issue for us. It's a priority issue for you.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Simonson, I appreciate the clarification of your answer there. But just to be very clear, this is a champion cause from the DFL, not from the Republican side. And so once again, we see that the waves of lies hit the rocks of reality. And the reality is that while progressive activists are getting told about their legislators in the DFL caucus championing their opposition to corporate tax breaks, the provision in this bill, this $4 million, which is on top of a $6 million tax increment financing incentive plan that all the residents of Duluth will be paying for, this is coming from your side. And so we just look for a little bit of consistency. It's okay to either be in favor or against it, but you can't argue both ways. And Representative Simonson, and to those who are critical of the broadband side of things, I would point out to people that technology moves fast. For those that don't know, there already are high-speed microwave deployments that are in place. It's a mature technology and allows people to have access to broadband in a much more cost-effective manner. The consequence to this, requiring a fiber installation for all technical internet, is very expensive and is not future-proof. And at some point in the future, as we see this billions of dollars of private sector investment for research and development into wireless, this will turn out to be a pretty foolish decision. But next year you have that opportunity, Representative Simonson. This is a one-year appropriation, and you do have that opportunity to correct that. And one of the things I look forward to working with the department on is to have a demonstration project of some sort of wireless deployment to show exactly the sort of high-speed bandwidth capabilities that exist today, what they can be provided at a lower cost, so we can provide more high-speed bandwidth at a lower price. Representative Liebling, you made a comment earlier about young people caring about the environment, and I think that is a very good point, Representative Liebling. So it's very troubling when you take a look at the proposals that the House Majority Party put forward to reduce pollution and lower prices that were opposed by the environmental community. Now, let me give you just one example of the many that were out there. Under the Democrat leadership 2 years ago, a Made in Minnesota solar program was created. This is a $150 million subsidy for rooftop solar deployments across Minnesota with very expensive solar panels. It is a matter of science, it is a matter of chemistry and emissions controls, that using that money instead to convert diesel-powered vehicles to natural gas will save money and reduce far more pollution than the solar fad of Made in Minnesota Solar. So for the science deniers who want to pretend that solar is better, yes, the science deniers on the left who want to ignore the fact that converting diesel to natural gas is a far better environmental benefit, involves particulate matter, saves money for consumers, and is reliable compared to the 16% capacity factor of expensive rooftop solar. I think it's pretty clear that when you run the numbers and you look at the math, everybody wants as much clean energy as possible at the lowest price possible. And so I look forward to making that case to the next generation. I'll have some other comments in my closing remarks, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The member from Clay, Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. And I think this bill is very symbolic of what has been the message for rural Minnesota this entire session. You know, it started that this was going to be the rural Minnesota session and all the hoopla and the bluster and all this that was going to happen. And just looking at the broadband, I think there was a bill introduced early on that had $100 million for broadband. The first House Republican proposal had 0 for broadband. Then it went to 8, and now $10 million. When we have a $2 billion surplus. During deficit times, $20 million invested into broadband when the needs are about $200 million. Earlier this session, I was talking to a council member from central Minnesota who is a business owner. And he said when school was in process that he really couldn't use his internet until school was out because it was using so much of the bandwidth. Those are the needs out in rural Minnesota. But again, this is symbolic of what we have seen the entire session. Now I want to remind Representative Hertaus that the Republicans are in the majority here in the House. You had total control over whether or not we had a tax bill. But the fact of the matter is, you were unwilling to compromise 1 iota on a transportation bill, so there was no tax bill. You had total responsibility for that. And to somehow say it was beyond your control, if that's the case, why don't you just move the gavels over to the other side of the aisle, and we will lead. We will take charge and move the state forward. But by any measure, rural Minnesota in this session saw a big, big flop. The biggest issue out there in rural Minnesota, rising property taxes for our farmers. Oh boy, did I hear a lot about that. We're going to lower those property taxes for farmers, but you had total control, decided not to do a tax bill. Farmers will see no relief in rural Minnesota. Local government aid. In a deficit time the last session, $88 million provided for cities on local government aid. This year, with a $2 billion surplus, zero. Zero for rural Minnesota on local government aid. 2 years ago, we froze tuition at our colleges. Huge for rural Minnesota families. This year, we could not freeze tuition for all of our families, even though we have a $2 billion surplus. You look at a huge issue of safety in our communities. Oil, train, safety. Huge issue. And I think members just saw last week what happened when a semi-trailer collided with an oil train. The danger is real. The need for dollars is real. Rural Minnesota communities are asking for this. And yet, with a $2 billion surplus, not a dime. So, members of the majority, Republicans, you had total control over what we saw in a tax bill, a transportation bill, all of these bills, but our roads and bridges won't be fixed. Our cities and counties and our residents there will see no property tax relief. In fact, we're going to see property tax going higher, going up. For our senior citizens, our families, our farmers, and our small businesses, property taxes are going up. Tuition is going up. Farm taxes are going up. Communities are not being made any safer for oil trains coming through. This was a major failure for rural Minnesota, and you had total control over those bills.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and I also wanted to speak, like Representative Bly, specifically to the net metering provision. And the reason that this provision is so disturbing is that we do have scientific realities, Representative Garofalo, around climate change. And you're at least consistent because you were the one member of the majority that did vote to acknowledge that reality. A reality that maybe the majority doesn't acknowledge, but most of the rest of the world does, and certainly the scientific community. And so when we take a step backwards from a proven green, clean energy source such as solar energy, we take a step backwards in acknowledging the reality and our responsibility for the urgency of addressing the issue of climate change. And so by taking away this net metering incentive, we, beginning in July 1st, and I know it's only the munis and co-ops, but not only, those are very important constituencies, particularly in greater Minnesota. When we deny that opportunity for our residents, for some residents of the state, to take advantage of this important incentive, we are sending a message that we don't take solar energy seriously as part of the solution and part of the issue of resolving our immediate and urgent issue of climate change. And so, members, this is a very, very troubling precedent, and I'm sorry that it's in this bill. It's one of many reasons I'm voting no, and I would encourage the chamber to vote no on this legislation.
Any further discussion on the bill? The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahone, the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I wasn't going to speak, but Representative Hertas, I was intrigued by your comment about crony capitalism. So I found the bill, and all these little green tabs are the earmarks throughout the bill. $1.8 million to a grant to the city of Cambridge, $100,000 to a grant to the city of Taylor's Falls. $35,000 for the first year is for an economic development grant to the city of Delano to reimburse the Delano 4th of July Committee for unanticipated tax liabilities related to past city celebrations. So I guess I need to check with my community's parades and see if they've lost any money. Every member now, we set this precedent. Lots of green tabs in here, both sides. I think Representative Mahoney, you've got one in there. So where do these green tabs come from? Where do they come from? Yep, there's one there from China. Yeah. They're in there. And they're in there because the people out in the hall, the special interests that write these bills through their representatives, come here and put it in for us to vote on. And it's not right. Minnesotans know what's going on, and they're not happy.
Any further discussion? The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I could just say what everybody else just said, particularly what Representative Marquardt said, because the biggest thing that stands out for me in this bill, and I would just echo what one of the Greater Minnesota mayors recently said, was that this session was a flop for Greater Minnesota, and I don't think anybody could have been more accurate or succinctly summed that up. I mean, the reality is just saying no is not going to build a single road or bridge in this state, but that's what you said. No broadband investment, no economic development, really investment for Greater Minnesota. The fact that you are crowing about saving $24 million when that could have actually been invested in our communities in Greater Minnesota, I think sums up perfectly your attitude toward the direction that this state has to be going. No property tax relief, and I would also agree with Representative Marquardt that the legislator's greatest defender of millionaires is now standing up and not taking accountability for the fact that there is no property tax relief for any residents of the state of Minnesota. And I'm sorry to the rest of the Republicans. I know you are vehemently battling to be the greatest defender of millionaires in the state, but I think Representative Hertas gets that title this year. But the bottom line is, where we are right now, and the thing that I want to focus on is why we're here. I remember the last night of session. This bill came to the floor with just minutes to spare. The reality for anybody who's being honest in this room is that not a single person, not the speaker, not the majority leader, not Representative Garofalo, nobody in this room knew what was in this bill. It was rammed through, voted on with not even everybody having the chance to vote, with zero debate. I guess the best thing you can say is we're actually now having at least a chance to debate the bill. Not a single person in this room knew about this bill, and nonetheless, when you passed the bill, you all stood up and applauded for voting on a bill that you had no idea what was in it. To me, in my 13 years at the legislature, that is the lowest moment that we have had as a body. The fact that you would stand up and cheer for a bill that you voted for but had zero idea that it was in it, had zero chance to debate it, that's shameful. But it's the reason that we are here today. I'm sure that Representative Loon and Speaker Doubt have been kicking themselves for the last 4 weeks for the fact that they left a $125 million offer from the governor without any pre-K in it, which is exactly what we ended up with in this special session. Had they taken that deal 4 weeks ago or 3.5 weeks ago, we wouldn't have had to have a single day of this special session. We would have had the bill signed and we would have been moving on our way. Now, the good news for our caucus is that because of that, this bill has improved somewhat. The environment bill has improved somewhat. The education bill is improved because Governor Dayton dragged you all kicking and screaming to actually fund our schools and make some investments in early education. But this is a special session that didn't have to be here at all. If we had sat back in January thinking that we have a $2 billion budget surplus, that we have a growing economy, and I will note, our economy is growing, and you see the tax revenues coming in higher and higher every month. The argument I think you made to the people of Minnesota that the budget that was passed in the last 2 years was going to tank the economy of Minnesota, well, I think that the nail in the coffin has been hammered in on that probably 100 times over. And the fact of the matter is, aside from some bad policy, the budget you're passing today doesn't change that trajectory. I mean, you're going to be passing what's essentially a Democratic budget as we move forward here, because you passed a budget under $40 billion. We're at $42 billion. In terms of spending right here. We're not, but the fact of the matter is, even though we're passing the biggest budget in the history of the state by far, you still weren't able to freeze college tuitions. You still weren't able to invest in broadband. You still weren't able to make any progress on our transportation system. This session, when we ended, was a failure. This special session isn't changing that grade one bit. But at the end of the day, members, you know, we can, again, at least we've had a chance to debate this bill a little bit. You know, there's some good things and bad things in this bill, but the problem is we missed a big opportunity to actually make progress for Minnesota. This is a status quo kind of dead-end bill. It doesn't do much for anybody. And we had a great opportunity to do it, to actually do something different. So members, I would encourage people to vote no on the bill, and I hope when we come back in March, we'll come back with a better attitude, a better approach for Minnesotans that is actually going to kind of make the investments for middle-class families, for working Minnesotans, that will, for farmers and for small business people, that will actually make a difference and continue to move us forward.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I wasn't necessarily going to talk, but Representative Marquardt, you motivated me to speak. And what I have to say to you is, there you go again, talking about us in rural Minnesota. You know, Representative Marquardt, when Democrats were in charge, you put Minneapolis and St. Paul first. You elected a leader from Minneapolis and a speaker from Minneapolis, a majority leader from St. Paul. You did away with the Agriculture Committee, which I think everybody in this room would say is pretty darn important to rural Minnesota. But you did away with it, and you put a Minneapolis environmentalist in charge of that committee, and that was your choice. But it sounds pretty disingenuous when you come here and you talk about the things that you've done for rural Minnesota versus what we've done for rural Minnesota. What are we doing today? We're investing in avian flu in a later bill. What are we not doing? We're not raising property taxes by 3.4%, which happened under your administration. Representative Marquardt, you sent some letters out and you talked about LGA and what we did for LGA. And what you did, Representative Marquardt, is you stood behind your leader and you supported increases of LGA for Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I think that should be pointed out. And that's fine for the representative from Minneapolis and your leadership from Minneapolis and St. Paul, because that's what they want. 77 million for Minneapolis, 62 million for St. Paul. You supported that. You stood by and you supported that. That does nothing for rural Minnesota. That builds some nice monuments in Minneapolis and other things. But just to be clear, that does nothing for rural Minnesota. What else are we doing? Providing unemployment insurance for steel workers in northern Minnesota. I have to thank Representative Garofalo and all the hard work he's done on this bill. This has been a very long process. It's disappointing that the governor shut us down after we came to a bipartisan conclusion to session. But Representative Garofalo and others have worked hard on this, and we've done our job for Minnesotans and what the people sent us here for. So members, today I would ask for a yes vote on this bill. Thank you.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I appreciate the debate on this bill. And also, I want to make sure that I give a shout out and I thank members of both caucuses who've been working together this session. One of the things I've been most proud about is the fact that those in rural Minnesota do have an understanding of energy issues. It's more personal. They have customer-owned energy companies, and because of that bipartisan work we were able to get together, we were able to do some substantial reforms in the area of energy. I do want to also make a point to point out that the EITE language is something that you're going to be hearing quite a bit about. For those that don't know, this is the energy intensive trade exposed language. Right now in northern Minnesota, a small number of power consumers consume the vast majority of electricity. These are the forest products industry, forest service products industry, as well as the taconite industry. And right now, those ratepayers are subsidizing other ratepayers. And in this bill, there's going to be a shift. Now, I want to be very clear that people understand it's not going to be a reduction in energy prices. What's going to happen is the pie is going to shift so that those large users will be subsidizing less. But and while that certainly may be unpopular, I do want to give credit to the DFLers from the Iron Range for stepping up to the plate and recognizing the fact that the other alternative, that these businesses close and 100% of that is shifted onto other ratepayers, would be cataclysmic for rates in northern Minnesota. So I want to thank members on both sides of the aisle. A couple of lessons we learned this session. One is, and it's a very important lesson, is we dispelled this ridiculous notion that higher energy prices create jobs. There was an attempted narrative 2 years ago to say that by simply having energy created in Minnesota and paying twice as much for it, that somehow that created jobs. That has been blown away, and actually now in law, we recognize the fact that more affordable energy means more jobs. Second of all is that recognition that we did today for those who are the unemployment benefits for those in northern Minnesota, as well as those who are suffering from the avian flu outbreak. I don't know how anyone could possibly vote against those benefits for those workers, but those are in the bill today. And then third and finally, and it's an unfortunate matter, but it's something that's not in the bill. Actually, it's good that's not in the bill. But we had to waste over a week from the governor's office trying to repeal an auditor's provision that he had just signed into law. It's one of the things that was holding this bill up, and I want to thank members on both sides of the aisle for holding that coalition together, for Republicans and rural DFLers to stand together to allow all the counties of Minnesota to have that same choice that the urban counties have. I want to thank Representative Sarah Anderson for her work on that. And Mr. Speaker and members, I would ask for a yes vote today on this bill. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will call the roll on final passage of House File 3. And members, I will enforce order on the floor so that our staff can hear the roll call votes. So please remain quiet during the roll call.
Albright. Aye. Albright votes aye. Allen. No. Allen votes no. Anderson M. excused. Anderson P. Yes. Anderson P. votes aye. Anderson S. excused. Anzels. Anzels votes aye. Applebaum excused. Adkins. No. Adkins votes no. Backer. Yes. Backer votes aye. Baker. Yes. Baker votes aye. Barrett. Aye. Barrett votes aye. Bennett. Aye. Bennett votes aye. Bernardi. No. Bernardi votes no. Bly. No. Bly votes no. Carlson. No. Carlson votes no. Christensen. Christensen votes aye. Clark. No. Clark votes no. Considine. No. Considine votes no. Cornish. Aye. Cornish votes aye. Daniels. Aye. Daniels votes aye. Davids. Yes. Davids votes aye. Davney. No. Davney votes no. Dean M. Aye. Dean M. votes aye. Dean R. excused. Detmer. Aye. Detmer votes aye. Dill. Dill votes aye. Drazkowski excused. Earhart. No. Earhart votes no. Erickson. Aye. Erickson votes aye. Fabian. Aye. Fabian votes aye. Fenton. Aye. Fenton votes aye. Fisher. No. Fisher votes no. Franzen. Aye. Franzen votes aye. Freiberg. No. Freiberg votes no. Garofalo. Aye. Garofalo votes aye. Green. Aye. Green votes aye. Gruenhagen. Gruenhagen votes aye. Gunther. Aye. Gunther votes aye. Hackbarth. Aye. Hackbarth votes aye. Halverson. Late. Hamilton. Yes. Hamilton votes aye. Hancock. Aye. Hancock votes aye. Hanson. No. Hanson votes no. Hausman. No. Hausman votes no. Heinzeman. Aye. Heinzeman votes aye. Hertos. Aye. Hertos votes aye. Hillstrom. No. Hillstrom votes no. Hoppy. Hoppy votes aye. Hornstein. No. Hornstein votes no. Hortman excused. Howe. Aye. Howe votes aye. Isaacson. Aye. Isaacson votes aye. Johnson B. Aye. Johnson B votes aye. Johnson C. Aye. Johnson C votes aye. Johnson S. No. Johnson S votes no. Kahn. Kahn votes no. Kelly. Aye. Kelly votes aye. Keel. Keel votes aye. Knobloch. Aye. Knobloch votes aye. Kosnick. Aye. Kosnick votes aye. Kreshaw. Aye. Kreshaw votes aye. Lane. No. Lane votes no. Lincheski. 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 Lesh. No. Lesh votes no. Liebling. Aye. Liebling votes aye. Lean. No. Lean votes no. Lilly. Lilly votes no. Loeffler. No. Loeffler votes no. Lomer. Aye. Lomer votes aye. Loon. Aye. Loon votes aye. Lunan. Lunan votes aye. Lucero. Lucero votes aye. Lewick. Lewick votes aye. Mack excused. Mahoney. Mahoney votes no. Mariani. Mariani votes no. Markwart. Markwart votes no. Mason. Mason pass. McDonald. McDonald votes aye. McNamara. McNamara votes aye. Moline. Moline votes aye. Metza. Metza votes aye. Miller. Miller votes aye. Moran. Moran votes no. Mullery. Mullery votes no. Murphy E. Murphy E votes no. Murphy M. Murphy M votes no. Nash. Nash votes aye. Nelson. Nelson votes no. Newberger. Newberger votes aye. Newton. Newton votes no. Nornis. Nornis votes aye. Norton. Norton votes aye. O'Driscoll. O'Driscoll votes aye. O'Neill. O'Neill votes aye. Pulowski. Pulowski votes aye. Pepin. Pepin votes aye. Purcell. Purcell votes no. Petersburg. Petersburg votes aye. Peterson. Peterson votes aye. Pearson. Pearson votes aye. Pinto. Pinto votes no. Poppy. Poppy votes aye. Pugh. Pugh votes aye. Quam. Quam votes aye. Rarick. Rarick votes aye. Rosenthal. Rosenthal votes no. Runbeck. Runbeck votes aye. Sanders. Sanders votes aye. Schoen. Schoen votes no. Schumacher. Schumacher votes aye. Schultz. Schultz votes no. Scott. Scott votes aye. Seltzer. Seltzer votes no. Simonson. Simonson votes no. Slocum. Slocum votes no. Smith. Smith votes aye. Sundin excused. Swazinski. Swazinski votes aye. Tice. Ty votes aye. Thiessen. Thiessen votes no. Torkelson. Torkelson votes aye. Uglum. Uglum votes aye. Erdahl. Erdahl votes aye. Vogel. Vogel votes aye. Wagenius. Wagenius votes no. Ward. Ward votes no. Whalen. Whalen votes aye. Wills. Wills votes aye. Winkler. Winkler votes no. Yarusu. Yarusu votes no. Joachim. Joachim votes no. Zerwas. Zerwas votes aye. Speaker Doubt. Speaker Doubt votes aye. Lincheski. Lincheski votes no. Mason. Mason votes no.
I declare the roll call closed, and the clerks will tally the votes. There being 78 ayes and 47 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.